So um, I just went out for a walk and had a yarn with someone about these sort of some of the political stuff going on, and an interesting but not 100% accurate conversation emerged about warfare strategies. So in a warfare situation, there's a sort of a staging to the attacks, and then there's the introduction or use of different groups for that. And so you can sort of see a structure or tiering to it, even if there's not a formal hierarchy or association between the groups. So basically, took down some notes about the ideas that they had, and it sort of works a bit like this. So it's a 12 stage attack. There's it starts off like this. So it starts off with covert surveillance. Then the first step is covert surveillance. The second step is starting to prepare for the entrapment. So the information goes both directions. So in the first step, the ringleader engaging in the warfare does a covert surveillance on the target or targets, and then the information goes two ways. So they start to feed misinformation basically to the target, and then what they start to do as well is they start to do things around the sides as well, so people around them maybe. So they start doing a similar strategy on the people around them, doing covert surveillance on them, and then they started to feed misinformation around those other people as well. Okay, so that's the third step, and that's called preparing for the dragnet. So in stage 4, when they've got that sort of misinformation covert surveillance thing with more than one party, they then that misinformation is a confusion for the ones that they're preparing for the dragnet. So the dragnet kind of operates in similar function to the flying monkeys of the Narcissus type metaphor. When that misinformation is going around, that's called the propaganda phase. So the fifth step is that the ringleaders or ringleader notices that some of the flying monkeys or dragnet people are doing the heavy lifting. So they're actually a useful person for their particular operational purposes, and so it's amenable to that misinformation, or be doing the heavy lifting. So those individuals become gradually brought into the fold as a hunting party. So that's how they prepare the hunting party. In the sixth step, so the ringleaders start to prepare excuses in the form of darvos. So this part of the propaganda phase is alleging that the target who was being covert surveilled in the first place and delivered misinformation, who isn't part of the hunting party, is in fact the one being the hunted, basically, has somehow consented to it somehow or done something to cause it. So that's the next type of propaganda, which is preparing to smear the victim in a form of darvo. Okay, so obviously where there's covert surveillance and misinformation, that's not true consent, that's deception. So that's darvo. They've pretended that there was consent when there was not. So 7. Okay. So and what they're really saying there is the ringleader believes they're about to get what they want, and therefore the victim has consented to it. When obviously they haven't. They might not even be aware this is going on. 7. The seventh step is so with the dragnet or hunting party in place, which has a mixture of flying monkeys and detractors as well, by the way, because some people are probably a bit sus at this point. that qualifies as a foothold situation. So the offender or the ringleader starts to belittle the target. They start to belittle the target. So what you'll see there is don't know, trying to figure it out. So with the foothold situation is that the ringleader or ringleaders believe that they have exerting some kind of influence over at least some kind of critical mass of the dragnet population for the purpose of a hunting party. So they continue the propaganda, which is in that case involves belittling the target. So the target's obviously a stupid person, and I look at the kinds of things that they agree to and stuff like that, or whatever it might be, or some other form of subtle or not so subtle belittling of the target in question. And so at that point, you'll find things like instead of other types of propaganda and misinformation, which is not so direct, becomes a bit more personalised at stage 7. So you'll find things like sexism and racism and other forms of prejudice are used as a means to belittle. Okay, so stage 8 is that the ringleader starts to notice that there's still resistance. So the target is still resisting somehow. Throughout all of this, the target has been resisting the control of the offender or offenders, ringleaders. There's still members that the ringleaders want to be part of their hunting party or their dragnet that are not necessarily agreeing to everything. So at that point, threats are made against third parties. So people who are not the target, but are actually other people, might be taken as hostages or alleged to be taken as hostages as a means by which. So I just got a bit sidetracked. Might have been at step 8 that they detect that there's still resistance. So the threats get a bit louder. Start to threaten hostages, or take hostages, or generally they get a bit upset that they're not being agreed with. Somehow the ringleader's been it's sort of almost like a narcissistic rage blowback from the part of the ringleaders or the offenders. And so they when they detect resistance from people they believe to be part of their dragnet or hunting party, they might threaten a third party in relation to a member or someone they want to be part of their hunting party or third party, or they might threaten a third party associated with the target. So, and of course the target, by this point it's probably gotten quite sus, and we'll explain some of the things that what the target might do or have done in a different moment. So the next stage is because the target and or those that didn't want to be flying monkeys basically continued to resist. The threats were acted out, and so hostages were harmed in some capacity. Genuine harm got caused. In worst case scenarios, in genuine hostage situations, they might even be dead. And because that didn't cause compliance, so resistance continued after threats were acted out. At stage 9, they bring in backup. So now they start calling in their flying monkeys. Okay, or they get bringing in extra guerrilla groups or militias as flying monkeys. Okay, so now at stage 10, this is the type of thing you might hear. Your village is surrounded and some of your people are dead. Pay tribute or else, accept the new bosses or else. So they've tried to overwhelm the target or targets with the backup because their early stage of threats were not resulting in compliance. So in a domestic violence situation, sometimes the hostage is a pet. So when the pet is harmed, the pet is harmed and it doesn't result in full obedience or compliance or whatever irrational demands the ringleader or domestic violence offender is looking for, then they might start to overwhelm everyone else. It may even be the case that people that they expected to be a flying monkey or part of their dragnet was showing signs of resistance as well. So then they go for the full violent mode then. Okay, and of course, this kind of type of maltreatment might provoke rebellion. So they resist. So the resistance continues. There might be subtle or not so subtle forms of rebellion. There's not complete compliance or adulation of the offender or whatever it might be. And so they resort back to a different tactic. Instead of overt violence or covert violence, they do verbal and social violence again, and they go into a bad-mouthing or smear campaign of the targets. So they start to allege they were this or that, or they had this or that problem, or they did all this or that, and none of those things are true. So if someone's experiencing that, then they might be at stage 11 of an invasion strategy, or they might be at stage 4 or stage 6. Okay? But the bad-mouthing and smear campaign gets really bad at that point because, as you probably know, this has happened in countries that have been invaded. After the native populations were invaded and went through all of those things, the offender, being the belligerent army or country that invaded, started to say bad things about them. So in the case of Australia, Aboriginal people were all alcoholics, things like that, or criminals and stuff like that. Those things were actually Darvo because technically it is actually the case that the Redcoat Army invaded and stole Australia. It wasn't the other way around. So a common throwback retort, if you will, from some Aboriginal activists in Australia is, well, actually Aboriginals aren't the thieves. England is. Okay? 12. Okay, the 12th step with a smear campaign going on is, that didn't work. Pretend you were rescuing someone. Okay, because the bad-mouthing smear campaign didn't work, did it? Well, actually, Redcoats, you stole Australia, not the other way around. Why are you calling everyone thieves for? That didn't work, so pretend you're rescuing someone. And at that point, after that, you got the Aboriginal Protectorate as an example in Australia. So it's the Aboriginal Protectorate was a way to try and friend the population by having them corralled onto missions, told they couldn't speak their language, and made to learn the Christian religion. And apparently that was helping them. That they were friends. They were, beating the black out of, smoothing the pillow of a dying race, things like that, because that's helping apparently. So as you can see, it's a stage invasion strategy, and it's not particularly. You can probably see examples of that playing out in lots of different countries. Actually, it's warfare. So there is a relationship between domestic violence and warfare. It's very similar. Okay, in response to this particular form of militarism, something an activist might do. So at stage 1, when covert surveillance begins, the target might smell a rat and advise an ally that there's something sus going on, but they don't know what it is. Something doesn't seem right about that one. Don't know what it is. You don't feel right for some reason. Don't know what it is. Okay, at stage 2, when the misinformation campaign suddenly starts to develop in the two-way communication, so it's just not just surveillance anymore, it's also misinformation, they might start to express concern to more allies or attempt to go to a different location. So they go and find someone else and go, did you know that so-and-so said something that was a bit weird? Do you know what that means? Right. At stage 3, there's continuation of that. They might communicate to the very people that are being formed as part of the dragnet of flying monkeys. Okay, and it will become the dragnet of flying monkeys over the course of time. So they try to expand the awareness campaign by not necessarily saying that the person or people in question are ringleaders, but more like expressing concern because something doesn't smell right. It's a bit off. So they might not be aware whether or not the person in phase one that they advised as an ally was really an ally at all. There could be the potential for betrayal there. It could be that that person is a flying monkey in disguise, or as some people call them, Jackies. Okay. So stage four. Stage four. Try and let and again, some people are pinned as Jackies when they're not as well. Stage four, try and let off clues. Activists might try and let off clues to the Dragnagoot about who's the troublemaker, and slide tactics might apply. So at stage four, an activist might be forced to have interactions with the people who are being trained up to be the flying monkeys of the narcissist, or shall we say, general in question, and they might be not really, they're not trying to do a smear campaign so much as they're asking questions. So and so has been doing some strange things. Have you noticed? Can you provide an explanation for that? And in that particular situation, they're acting as an emissary. So this is almost like the sort of bargaining phase. They're trying to, not really bargaining or looking to make deals or anything like that, so much as they're trying to negotiate the situation to try and figure out what's happening. And so they start to investigate. There's something sus. They're smelling a rat. They're asking for second opinions. They try and figure out what those opinions are about people who might know the offender in question. So they're trying to figure out what that means. So stage 5 is basically being a state of shock if betrayal eventuates. So when the the corollary to stage 5 before, okay, was the at that point the ringleaders already formed the hunting party and the flying monkeys, and already started a propaganda as well. Okay, because they've done that, the one who's sort of investigating and smelling the rat and trying to sort of almost acting like an emissary and trying to figure out what's going on, it turns out any of the people they thought were allies with Jackies, or any of the people that they thought would be part of this sort of support group, turned out to be flying monkeys. Then they get betrayed. They start to get betrayed at stage 5. At stage 6, if betrayal occurs in particular, or there has been any signs of attack, then those individuals start to show signs of resistance. By this point, because either way, by this point, they're becoming very, very sus. So the activist, who's the activist target, becomes very sus. And they start to show signs of defense, typically because they might not be aware of the agenda, because it begins with covert strategies. They don't actually know what the agenda is. They're not even being apprised of that. They are having to guess. And this whole process is a type of gaslighting on its own. And so at this point, it doesn't matter if there are a well-skilled, intelligent individual or individuals in other areas. When it comes to that particular style of warfare, that particular series of events occurs in, they probably don't have the same skills, resources, or experiences as the ringleader or ringleaders and their particular hunting party or group. And so those particular people, they'll defend with whatever skills they have. And so at that point, maybe in the Australian context, you saw spears being thrown at muskets. It wasn't quite working. Okay, and of course, bush warfare. So there was a capability of ambushing strategies and that sort of thing as well. However, there's what probably needs to be said in the Australian context, if you want to continue to use that as an example, or hear that as an example, is that poisoning water and sort of Geneva Convention breaches was probably not part of the ancient Australian warfare strategies. That type of lowbrow breach of Geneva Convention tactics that the Redcoats brought was probably not predicted. There were rules in warfare in Australia. There were rules in warfare across the world, actually. And sort of in certain battle contexts, such as the Crusades or the colonial period, those rules were thrown out the window, and you started to see less of two armies fighting on a distinct battlefield and more of two armies invading a city or a village and disrespecting the inhabitants, taking hostages, and so on and so forth. So the defensive strategies of the groups in question were probably lacking. So they could deal with, take for example, asking a police officer to deal with a full-blown military invasion. They're not going to do that. Low-level criminals that they can apprehend with some handcuffs and maybe tase is where they're at. They actually don't have advanced tactical training in war, and so a police officer, no matter how skilled they are, could be overwhelmed. That would be an example of 6 as well in a war situation. 7. So what they might do is watch it first. So the target or the activists might watch because they're not really understanding what the warfare strategies are of the other group. They're a new group with new strategies, for example, with a new ringleader or whatever. That could be what's going on. It's a new type of battle, maybe. They don't know what the agenda is. They know there's something wrong though, and they've tried to resist. So they start to observe and watch the strategies involved. And so, what are these? What's going on here? Like, what's really going on here? Maybe they might test a little bit too, but mostly they'll watch. And so, okay. This is taken advantage of typically by the offenders because what they're seeing at stage 7 is typically the precursor to the next attack. They might not acknowledge it at the time, but that's what they're seeing. And so they might attempt to defend, and they typically it's verbal, and they might not get heard. So they might say, "Well, what are you doing that for? Why are you here? What's going on?" That's not true. So in stage 7, with what the attacker was doing is belittling the target. So that's one of the another propaganda phase. So but as part of the defensive strategies, the propaganda is rejected, and as a form of defense, it's typically not heard. Stage 8. So at that point, because the offenders have acknowledged that they're experiencing resistance and not automatically just getting what they want, which is their toxic sense of entitlement, they may have taken hostages. In the case of domestic violence, it could be a pet. So the targets of the domestic violence, which would be the people in that situation, would attempt to defend the pet. And so this pet stuff is distinct from the generic warfare thing of an invasion of an entire country. So now we're using domestic violence as an example, okay? So in that situation, an example might be they've tried to defend the pet, okay, but they're in a difficult situation because they're surrounded, okay? So they're acting altruistically towards because it's like you don't give him what he wants, you're gonna hurt your dog or cat, right? No, don't hurt Moggy, don't hurt doggy, type of thing. Okay. So at stage 9, where the resistance would occur because they attempt to defend the pets or any other hostages that might be taken, the offender gets more vicious because they didn't get what they wanted. So they start to call in the flying monkeys. and if the batch they already had weren't working, they have more waiting. They try to prepare more. Okay, and so then the target or targets have to fight off the flying monkeys. So in the case of the Australian context of the invasion by Britain, they were using convicts and settlers as flying monkeys. And what's really interesting to notice about that is that that particular dragnet or that particular invasion strategy meant that because the convicts were brought to Australia against their free will and consent, they resisted the tyranny of the redcoats in the form of the Rum Rebellion. So the redcoats were upset that they didn't have as many flying monkeys as they wanted. So a large part of their invasion strategy was attempting to separate the burgeoning attempt at friendship between the convict class and the native populations. The convicts didn't want to be part of the Redcoat Society because it had betrayed them. So the gradual introduction of other waves of settlers as a sort of attack force and the indoctrination of those people meant that those people had a mixture of flying monkeys for the redcoats and people who were a bit more like the convicts and want nothing part of it. As a consequence of that, there is a significant population in Australia of what you might call Celtic Aboriginal people, who exist as a consequence of people who didn't want to be flying monkeys, and in some cases as a consequence of people who did and used a rather toxic form of warfare instead. So that relates to stage 9. Stage 10. So in stage 10, you've got this sort of like with the foothold situation already there. The ones providing resistance, the activists and targets, are the ones who are not acknowledging the authority of the invaders or the offenders. So you might hear things like, "We don't have to listen to you because you're a bully. You're not making any sense." Or you might hear things like, "I'm sorry, but you don't have jurisdictional authority or from a foreign country." Right? Or whatever it might be. And there's lots of different ways that might happen, okay? And so the objective might be to evict the offenders. And so what was done there was quite in law and reason. You're not supposed to behave like that. That's actually not acting with authority at all. That's improper. And attempt to evict. So at that point, there might be an attempt to get some support, with allies and supporters from before, to try and get the offender out of the house, in the case of DV, or to, at that point, you probably find that the warfare is going 2 ways, and they're trying to kick them out. Okay, so it's not just muskets; it's spears. Okay, 11. Okay, so the limit type of resistance is they try to retaliate against the smear with the truth. Sometimes they do warfare as well, and they retaliate against smear with smear. But usually, because they're in a defensive position, the target activist tries to once again subvert the propaganda with honesty. Sorry, redcoats, but we don't eat our children. That's actually a myth and a lie. We eat goanna. What do you want about? We eat goanna and we kangaroo. What do you want? Also, it's not considered theft to nick the sheep that you just put in our fucking territory, when our territory is considered open hunting grounds. Sorry, that's dinner, and you can get stuffed. You don't want that to get eaten. Don't put it there. You showed up yesterday. Thank you very much. All right. 12. So one of the things that might happen is at that point, the offender's realising he might be, or the redcoats are realising, or the domestic violence offender or whatever, might be realising that things weren't as easy as they thought. They didn't have the warm milk, and they didn't get to just roll in with tanks and destroy a whole bunch of lives and get a ticker tape parade. Actually, people weren't impressed at all. And so they might say things, we're just trying to help you and protect you from something else. And so in Australian history, here's how it happened. So stage 11, one of the things they also said was that Aboriginals were alcoholics and weren't fit to raise their children or some crap like that, or there was miscegenation going on. It was polluting both races. It was all, that's all obviously smear. Okay, it's racism and it's smear. So at stage 12, they opened the Aboriginal Protectorate, which means they rescued people by stealing them and putting them on missions. And so that type of example is the false friend dynamic, what they call type of thing. And so what might happen there is just what was just said there. How are those hostages rescued? If you're not in your proper location or home, due to being taken as hostages, that's not being rescued, and the one that's doing it is not your friend. And so, the people who were survivors of the trauma of the forced adoptions in Australia as well probably asked the same thing. How were they rescued? Here, the adoption agency lied about their birth parents. Surely enough, their adoptive family could have been very good to them, in many cases was, but they weren't really rescuing those people from single mothers or whatever it might be, or bad environments, so much as they were just engaging in wanton abuse and decimation of families and lives as excuse making and a general tendency to create collective trauma where it was completely unnecessary. And so as a consequence of that, both the stolen generation and forced adoption policies in Australia qualify as warfare strategies and domestic violence. Is that not the case? So, and the way feminism would be example of stage 12, wouldn't it, with the activists saying, how are they rescued? So let's look at tiering in warfare strategies. So the ringleader starts off sometimes on their own at first, and then sort of over time through the flying monkey phenomena start to develop troops basically. But not all of the people agree, as been noticed. The convicts didn't all agree, and sometimes they sided with the blackfellas, and good on them for that too. That's the right sort of history. So anyway, to continue on that story, okay, so it's obviously the case that when covert surveillance and mind control is going on, type strategies or whatever, that sort of gaslighting type of thing, that misinformation campaigns, that does not imply consent. The parties involved, including the flying monkeys, have been roped into a situation that they're not really agreeing to because they don't actually comprehend it. So when there's forced deception and tricky, there's no consent. Okay, so what's an interesting thing is that you sometimes find that the dragnet or the flying monkeys also act as defenders for the target. You get this really weird situation, for example, where in a domestic violence situation, classically it's the bloke doing the DV. It's not always the case, but we'll say classically. The bloke in that who's a DV offender in that case sometimes has the wife as both the target and the flying monkey, and so. And when the domestic violence is also targeted at one of their offspring, for example, the wife in that case becomes part of the dragnet as well as acting as a defender for the child. So they're sort of in this sort of get this strange dynamic where the parent in question is both the source of the problem and the solution, and so it's really, really awkward. And so the flying monkeys don't want to be flying monkeys, in truth. There is a portion of them that are directly opposed to the ringleader, and there's others that are sort of, as stated before, kind of more susceptible to the propaganda and misinformation, and so joined in. In a good example of that, United States politics at the moment, could be the difference between just generic conservatives in the USA and MAGA proper. MAGA proper were flying monkeys that were absolutely susceptible to the propaganda and misinformation, whereas whereas the generic conservatives that were supporters of the Republican Party, once they figured out that there was something that they're smelling a rat, they moved quickly away from there and changed their mind. Okay, and now you can see the flying monkeys of MAGA are starting to follow. So they're in a really weird situation where they don't actually like the ringleader. They're sus on the ringleader. They think they're defending the village from the ringleader by supporting the ringleader. So they're sort of there's the ringleader or the narcissist or general or whatever tries to position themselves as to say the defender and the attacker is the same character, and that puts the flying monkeys in a very awkward position. So they continue like that, and sometimes you get sneaky bastards, which you call double agents. So ones that are aware of what's going on. They can see that the target has been manipulated. They can see that there's flying monkeys involved. They have also been manipulated, and they're a bit sus on it. So they try to take control of the target to take control of the offender as an indirect means. And that's what's really interesting about it. How can you tell who that one is? And at what point does that double agent switch to the other side and show their true colours, where they're actually supporting the ringleader, and their fake defence of the target was just that, fake. They were vying to stage a coup d'etat over the offender rather than actually just acting like a double agent flying monkey that was trying to control the target to get to the offender. Okay, so that becomes difficult to discern. So at some point, so that's what you call that. That's your stage. That's the stage one group right there. Okay, and so later on, as was articulated before, with the waves of invaders that follow, the backup post-hostage situation, or the settlers in some cases, in case of invading a country, that sort of phase follows after the double agents tell off the ringleader. And the double agents telling off the ringleader is an example of this is convicts that were not part of the Irish Rebellion or the Rum Rebellion, but partially supported it. So in the case of the Rum Rebellion in Australian history, there were a lot of convicts were sent for stealing bread or something like that. But there was this contingent that was sent because they were part of the Rivermen and Orange Order in Ireland, and they had been fighting against the Redcoats in Irish territories for Irish sovereignty, and in modern terms would be classified as a terrorist group. And those particular terrorists, or freedom fighters, if you will, depending on your point of view, were transported sort of in the early 1800s. And and in about sort of 1814, 1815, right about that time, staged the Rum Rebellion to just straight up kill the Redcoats, which, by the way, would have been a really good thing for Australia in terms of the frontier wars that followed. Here they succeeded. The problem is they didn't. And one of the reasons for that is probably because the people who were convicts who weren't part of the Irish rebel groups would have had a mixture of supporters and detractors amongst them, and those people acting as double agents would have supported the Rum Rebellion in one way and countermanded in another. And so they would have been telling off the Redcoats, right? But also doing other things as well. So that would have been more opportunistic. And so and in some cases, of course, unfortunately, there were not all, but some rum rebels that gave up on their rebellion in overt ways anyway. Covert ways is another story. Okay, what happened? What happens there is that in that case the ringleader, or Governor Arthur Phillip, was defeated. So the Rum Rebellion didn't work entirely, but Governor Arthur Phillip was defeated, and he was considered a failure by the British Imperial Army and sent back to England. And Governor Lachlan Macquarie, who was someone with a much more heavy hand, was brought to Australia instead, and he declared genocidal war as a consequence, okay? So that part where they become more vicious because the previous hostage situation didn't work, kind of applies there. And so he became the next cartel, the next militia, in terms of the invasion strategy. So when you see that, you see two tiers, like you see two groups of armies almost, and also factions or rebellion. And when you look at that too, So you could treat Governor Arthur Phillip and Governor Lachlan Macquarie as guerrilla cartels almost, in the sense that they've got no connection whatsoever to Britain. Okay, at that particular situation, they're literally 20,000 to 30,000 kilometres away, in a journey that takes about a year by ship. Okay, so in the late 1700s and early 1800s, okay, the amount of time it took to get to Australia by ship was nearly a year. It was a very long time, and so the sort of disconnect or proximity to authority thing was quite apparent. And so even though they had fealty or whatever to the Crown, they also had a situation of what you might call their own fiefdom type of thing going on, and they might have taken some liberties that they might not have otherwise been able to take as well, not operating under direct orders all the time, as it turns out. And so because it would take so long for backup from the British Imperial Army to show up, and so that kind of meant that in the background there's this covert behind covert thing going on, where who's the ringleader behind the ringleader behind the ringleader, because the governors in that situation are actually employees of the Crown. And so the English aristocracy and parliamentary system and imperial army that worked for them were the ringleaders behind the ringleaders behind the ringleaders. And so as a consequence of that, what you call in the military tier situation, tier 1 is the aristocracy, the kings, the parliaments or whatever in England. And so you blame England. You blame the King of England. Blame King George V, okay? And the 6th or whoever it was, okay? Just blame those guys, okay? Blame Queen Victoria, okay? Things like that, okay? But in terms of the local militia or the tier 2 militia, you've got Arthur Phillip's men, and then tier 3, the invaders that took over the invaders, you've got Lachlan Macquarie and what followed. And so, as a consequence of that, you get a situation where, unless you develop some kind of class consciousness in what's called tier 2 and tier 3, so you get your rum rebellion going in both Arthur Phillip and Lachlan Macquarie's cartel situation. And then you develop a set of problems, okay? Which is that the Flying Monkeys wind up supporting tier 1, which is the King of England in that case. So when you're considering these variables in the No Kings movement in the USA at the moment, hope that helps you. Have a nice day. And by the way, the rum rebellion is still going to this day. It's just, it's cropped up as the trade union movement. It's cropped up as the tent embassy. It's cropped up as a lot of different things. However, the consequences of that type of imperial mindset with its tiers of militias and warfare strategies is still apparent. And it's more apparent than ever. Where it's been most apparent is in the spiritual warfare as associated with gender supremacy. Have a nice day.